Hey, welcome back to the Business News Hour. You can reach out to us on Twitter, at IOB_News Hour. And there you can keep up to speed on the business news from large to small companies, established to startups. Okay, so if you're a business person that wants more productivity, that maybe is thinking about how work gets done, or even thinking you need to hire more people, you might want to listen to this conversation with Kevin Schluter and Stephen Smith from WPA North America. I'll tell you, it's a bit longer than some of our interviews, but what you will hear will make an impact. I know it did for us. WPA, coming up next. Inside on Business, the News Hour is made possible through the support of Taro International. We all know technical skills are necessary, but so too are interpersonal skills like communication, team building, and effective presentation. And that's what Taro does. Achieve, lead, and outclass with TERO.com.
Inside on Business, the News Hour with Michael Libbie is made possible through the support of AARP Iowa. Real possibilities for people of every age. AARP Iowa. And Country Vet Naturals. Loved by pets, trusted by owners. CountryVetNaturals.com.
Welcome back to the Business News Hour. Thanks so very much for joining us. We're going to walk down a path that may seem odd, but in the end, you're going to come to the realization that goes, wait a minute, why the hell aren't people doing this already? And we're going to be talking with Kevin Schluter and Stephen Smith from Work and People Analytics. Don't let your eyes glaze over, because we're not necessarily talking about numbers, but we're talking about how things get done, why things get done, and who effectuates that change. All right. Kevin, welcome to the Business News Hour. Nice to have you here, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Good to be here.
I am, you and I have known each other peripherally for some time, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, because I think you guys are onto something that is awesome, in a word. Where did this whole idea of analytical research about work, the work that's done, and the people that do the work, where did all this come from?
Well, it really came from people who were constantly having to diagnose workforces and understand what they were doing and how they were doing it. And the traditional ways of trying to interview and look at maybe small facilitated groups or ask questions of leaders really weren't working and weren't effective, and they certainly were costly and time-consuming. And so we really created a technology, a platform, and a solution that derives that information in a much quicker, much more easy way for organizations to quickly assess themselves and make decisions on it.
Kevin, would it be accurate to say that many times in business, whatever that process seems to be, we get into a situation of groupthink, and that then whoever is the loudest voice in the crowd starts to steer the energy in that direction, where if we take a look at this analytically, we get a much more clean picture of where we are and where we ought to go?
No question. That's a great question. And Stephen Smith, actually, my colleague here, does an excellent job at pointing that out. When we get into those facilitation groups or leaders start to just make decisions, they understand things, but they don't understand them well enough, and they can't corroborate anything with evidence. So they rely on just their own emotional sense of what's going on in an organization, and they can't see an organization that has 100 or 10,000 people in it very well at all.
Right.
And so those decisions then are kind of half right and half wrong, and they're very slow to come about, and people don't come along with it. So underneath all that, those are the tools and the underpinnings. If you do it differently, the way that we do it, moves things more swiftly and gets everyone to buy in, and so the ship turns faster. Change happens, evolution happens.
Before we go to Stephen, and I want to get in on what he does, because I think that's fascinating work that he's been trained in. Who do you work for? I mean, what kinds of clients seek out your company?
It's really broad-based, but the simple answer, anyone who has a knowledge workforce. It's knowledge workforces, and that really consumes almost the entire industrialized economy.
What is a knowledge workforce?
A knowledge workforce is any organization where people are exchanging information, practices, and serving clients. They're really not... They may at the end point produce tangible or hard goods, but they're really using their own organization's intellect to be able to serve and create solutions for clients.
All right, so let's say Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company is a manufacturer of vehicles, okay?
Right.
At the end of the day, they have people putting things together that turns out a vehicle at the end of the assembly line. But in front of all that, is a whole bunch of other stuff, yes?
That's exactly right. And those transactional elements downstream are the things that get mechanized very quickly. They become very transactional. Computers can oftentimes and robots can do that type of work, but it's that upfront where you're really creating the solution that is the big value out in the marketplace.
Wow, yeah. And you got to know what that solution is and how do you measure the impact. Stephen, we're going to visit with you for just a minute because I think your background is, it plays into this very, very well. Could tell us what you're trained in and then explain it.
Yeah, so I'm trained in industrial organizational psychology.
All right, industrial organizational psychology.
It's a mouthful, yeah.
Yeah, so wow, you're dealing with how people think?
Yeah, how people think and how people behave, and those are oftentimes two very different things, and we kind of want to make that take those silos down between what we say and what we do and kind of put those in one place.
And how does industrial psychology, how people think and do and act, how does that impact business?
Yeah, so the way we act and behave directly influences the way we produce and the way we're trained and the way we influence outcomes. And those outcomes that all these organizations care about are directly influenced by the thought capital, the new ideas, the hard work, the teamwork that gets things done. So if we can use the theories about how people learn and behave, and if we can tailor those and positively influence those, we can thus influence our business positively.
And, yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
That sounds as though you've got to spend a lot of time as a business owner or a manager actually thinking about how things get done from a productivity and a policy sector, right?
I mean, absolutely. We have a finite amount of resources. Not everybody can be Google. So how do we get Google-like ideas, and how do we create greater work with what we have? And that's kind of what this is about.
How you get greater. Boy, yes. We don't have deep pockets. We don't have Google money, and we don't have Apple money, which, by the way, has really had a rough week on Wall Street. But we don't have those deep pockets. So when business needs to start to think about how they're doing what they're doing, they really need to dial it back a little bit and understand what they've been doing and where they want to go. Is that halfway there?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the other, the balance that needs to be struck is the balance between efficiency and effectiveness, right? How do we be as efficient with our time and our resources as possible, but get more bang out of that buck so that we can actually catch up to the next guy?
One of the statistics that's been out there is that the United States is not as productive as what we are. Our GDP may be going up, and what we're doing as far as our economy may be rising, but employee productivity is at a multi-decade low. Why would that be?
I think there's several reasons, but I think on an easier level from my perspective, I think one of the ways that we can improve this is by breaking the Tayloristic means in which we measure and apply these behaviors to people, right? I think if we're still looking for time at desk or time kind of spent in the Dilbert cartoon stuck in meetings, I think it's time to address these concerns and not make it a Sunday morning cartoon strip and actually do something that moves the dial a little bit.
That is brilliant. Because that is what business does. And the Dilbert guy, that is who we are.
And that's why we watch the cartoons, and that's why we love it.
And that's one of the other things. How many times do I talk to people in business, either emerging companies or established companies, and individuals in the C-suites are going, I just don't want to go to another damn meeting. Because I'm not seeing anything get accomplished.
And I think the problem is, we all know we're stuck in too many meetings. We all kind of know that we're stuck in these ruts. It's just we never have a means to do anything about it. I think something that we really focus on WPA is providing that evidence that kind of gets that action and that, oh my God effect. I'm spending how much time of my labor doing what? Where can I be using that time more effectively? And once we start to break down that, maybe fluffy psychology talk or start to break down some of these traditional barriers and actually give you the evidence you need, that inspires change, and that's where we see the growth.
Inspires change. I love it. All right, Kevin, I'm going to come back to you for just a second. So are you attempting to identify change in how things are done or in how people do them?
It's really both of those things. It's how they're done. It's the how that they do them, and it's also the why they're doing those things, and the processes and cultures that are over the top of that actually create those behaviors sometimes without people even knowing it.
So how do you? and this is the crux of the whole issue. I mean, we're talking about some pretty heady stuff here about actually having owners of businesses or managers of businesses, C-suite executives sit back and go, wait a minute, we need to readjust how we're thinking about how we do things and why we do things. How does WPA, and we're talking about work and people analytics, how do you go about measuring that?
Well, we really do it by validating a couple of different things. We're looking at behaviors. We're looking at also these attitudinal characteristics in the organization and the cultures at play in the organization. And once you look at 2 or 3 or 4 of these different evidence points, it's very easy. It paints a beautiful picture of the organization at work. And now change, to Stephen's point earlier, becomes very easy. Because when you see how you're doing things, it's very easy to see where the opportunities are and where the challenges are. And it makes people understand things and then helps create change very swiftly.
That's the voice of Kevin Schlueter, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about work and people analytics, WPA, which is an interesting name because that was a big part of the United States during the Depression, the Work Progress Administration.
That's right, yeah.
That put people to work.
That's
you know,
right.
and there was I was captivated by the WPA opportunity. Was that a boom? That was an aside, wasn't it?
No, but it's funny though. It does, and it is kind of a fun little analogy. Yeah.
All right, let's without giving us all the details, it's proprietary. How do you go about doing this kind of work, Stephen? How do you start to measure these things, and where do you look first, second, and third, perhaps?
Yeah, so I don't want to sound like I'm beating the drum too much by repeating these statements, but I think part of the difference is perception versus reality. I think as we measure people with analytics today, it's following meeting times and meeting notes and time in seat and things like that. But we also want to measure people's perception of what that time in seat is doing and time in meetings are spent. And I think arguably that's one of the pieces that we've been missing today. I think the other thing that we really want to address is breaking down silos. So something that our tool does really well is it measures across different, traditional groups or business units, so to speak, like real estate or technology or human resources. Coming from one of those large companies, I can tell you those silos are real. And every one of those silos has their own survey, their own process, their own methodology. And you can bet every one of those has their own solution that you, the C-suite, needs to take action on. Well, then how do you take action on those items? Chances are you probably divvy out your funds to each one of those silos. That way everybody gets some, but nobody really gets enough, right? What we do is we break that down by helping people play from the same sheet of music. So then HR can talk like IT, and IT can talk like real estate for the first time. And when we do that, we can start to prioritize with employees
where the money goes.
Exactly. And what matters most? How do I help the C-suite align resources to what's going to make the most bang for the buck?
Bingo. Yeah, okay. All right, so let me give you a real-world example. And we run into this thing all the time. Sales versus marketing. Because I'm in the marketing space, I always get a kick out of when I'm meeting the new vice president of sales and marketing, because nothing could be more divergent than sales and marketing. Usually these individuals are in charge of sales. They don't know squat about marketing. They just know that they've got to put more stuff to the bottom line. In that scenario, Stephen, how do you start to measure what's important and what moves the dial for productivity in a world that sometimes doesn't seem to talk to each other? IT, HR, sales, marketing.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to something that Kevin might have alluded to earlier, which is the idea that, we kind of span across different industries because we're going about the knowledge worker. So the knowledge worker has a core set of things that they do, whether they're in sales or marketing or HR. Honestly, we're spending our time analyzing or meeting or brainstorming or doing these various functions. By being able to break down what these different work silos might be by their basic foundational kind of building blocks of tasks and behaviors, now we can start talking about the same kind of activities and time, where it's being spent, what's giving you trouble, where's your roadblocks. I think today, right now, we're talking a lot about employee engagement. Honestly, I think there's a little bit of engagement exhaustion.
Yes, there is.
Instead, I want to break down the silos, and I want to break down the roadblocks to you doing your job. If I can help you do your job better, you're going to be more engaged, right? Engagement's an outcome, not the strategy.
Kevin, are you finding that when you are doing this work for businesses and you go in and you present at the end of the day your findings, are the people who you're working for, are they pretty much slack-jawed and go, "Oh, I had no idea"? Or what are you finding that people? What's the aha moment?
Yeah, I think there's often a lot of aha moments, but there's also a lot of validation for what leaders often see. And what really happens there is the aha there is, oh, we were right. Let's get moving on this right now. To Stephen's point, let's put our resources there. We thought we needed to do this. Let's do it now, because now we know what the outcome's really going to be, because the evidence validates it.
And at the end of the day, the research that you do, the work that you do, ends up saving corporations actually millions of dollars, because
tens of millions of dollars,
because they're not screwing around with stuff that doesn't matter.
Right. We uncover pure waste and can transfer all that work energy to the right places. So that's exponential, obviously, but just pure speed and decision making. And then also the outcome, when you transfer wasted energy in an organization to things that are good and useful, the entire organization's culture responds in such a wonderful way, because everybody gets it now. They think the leadership gets it, and all of a sudden everyone's rowing in the same direction.
Are there some business executives and leaders out there that you know that intuitively get this and they understand these processes without something like WPA? And if there are, are there people that you could say, here's an example. Schultz, for example, at Starbucks, or Bezos, or whomever it happens to be out there. Are there some people, Stephen, that get it? And what can we learn from those people that get it?
Yeah, I definitely think there are people that get it out there. And sometimes even for those people, it's not a matter of you just at the top of the house getting it as well. You need to make sure that everybody down the line has the same vision as you.
Yeah.
So even if you're the most brilliant guy out there, if you got a team of middle management that isn't on the same page, that's an even bigger issue than maybe you're not getting in the first place.
How true that is. I do a presentation. It's called 5 in 24. 5 things any business can do in 24 hours or less to remanufacture your brand and sell more stuff. And one of those 5 things is there are only 3 reasons people are not buying whatever you're selling. And number 1 is that you're turning out a product that is obsolete, nobody really needs. Number 2 is that you're using communication devices that are antiquated. And number 3, to your point, you have the wrong people in the positions that are not seeing where the company needs to go, yeah?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what's really important is these things that you're referring to are also extremely dynamic now. Like, they change significantly over shorter periods of time than they used to. So that's why an organization needs to continue to assess itself and understand itself and be able to see its picture of itself. That way they can constantly course correct and motivate everyone toward the right outcomes.
That's the voice of Kevin Schlueter, ladies and gentlemen. He's the president of WPA, Work and People Analytics. We're also visiting with Stephen Smith about this. I think this is groundbreaking stuff that people should really start to pay attention to. Who do you work for, Kevin? Give us a glimpse. I mean, the people that are listening to this right now goes, wow, I could really probably use that help, but there ain't no way I can afford to do this. So who do you work for?
Yeah, we really work for a wide variety of constituents, but we walk in the door and we're really seen in a couple of different places. Human resource professionals, especially those with real strategic mindsets that understand and are involved in the operations of the business, are critical. C-level executives, operations, and CEOs, because as Stephen said, we break down silos so easily with the evidence that we produce for those organizations. We also have partners who use our platform in service of their clients so that they can understand when they diagnose them very readily, and then they can help them create training and development programs, strategic plans, commercial real estate and workplace solutions in these things.
Bingo, ding, ding, ding. So, individuals, for example, that are advertising, marketing, communications agencies, a la us, we have a client or 2 or 5 that may not be realizing full productivity. And so because we're a trusted partner, we can then go to those folks and say, hey, you know what? We know these people that do this stuff in a non-threatening environment that will help you jack up your productivity and start to do work correctly. Would that be?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And you used a word that actually was really important. You said in a non-threatening environment, and Stephen knows about this because it's in what he does, psychological safety. Psychological safety for these organizations is one of the reasons how you really can crowdsource information that's valuable and valid, because it's safe and it came out in the right way. And this is sometimes in the survey world where in the processes where organizations don't do that well enough. Psychological safety is important.
Yeah, psychological safety. Well, why is that? The moment we start to be threatening with whatever it happens to be, up go the fences, and you can't get anywhere. And how many times have we been in whatever corporate America structure that is, and the first thing out of somebody's leader's mouth is, we're not doing whatever it is right, and all of a sudden everybody goes, oh, shoot, man, my job is on the line.
Adversity creates hierarchy.
Oh, boy.
And safety reduces hierarchy, and there's huge amounts of dollars in that in corporate America.
How do you go about marketing yourself, Kevin? I mean, or Stephen, how do you let people know that you're alive?
Yeah, so we do it actually in a variety of ways. So we kind of have three main channels we go through, like Kevin mentioned. One is certainly that HR space. So we talk to fellow practitioners. We do things like SHRM and conferences and such. One of the other channels we go through is corporate real estate. So as we think about this tool that produces all these behaviors, this behavior helps organizations dictate, well, what does my space look like? I don't want the same cookie cutter space that everybody else has. I don't want to build the next, great project that came from an architect in New York. I'm a financial firm in the Midwest, and that space might not be the same for me.
Interesting.
So our behavioral software can also say, well, based on the way your people are doing their work, where they're spending their time, and maybe how much or not they're using meeting rooms, maybe this is how you should build your space.
Wow, that's a whole different level.
Yeah, we haven't even got into that. And so for that channel, we're talking to traditional real estate architects and designers across the world as partners to help us get into organizations to help rebuild their space based on people.
Do you know how important that is? I mean, because you know how much money is... I know how much money is spent. I mean, I go to the architect, I say, okay, I want to build a building, and it's going to be blah, 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 and this is what I do. But without understanding how the workflow progress goes...
And
wow.
What you get is you get stuck with trends, and that's what you see even in our Des Moines metro area. You get stuck with very trendy spaces that might fit the time, might not. But the real question is, how does it influence people and productivity? That's what I care about. That's what I care about with my space. Does it influence people to be better at their jobs and happier with their lives? And right now, honestly, the answer is no. We're following trends, and that's why you see articles about open office being dead. Well, honestly, open office never really lived in the first place. It was one guy that did it, and we kind of just recut that cookie 1,000 times, I think there's opportunity.
Yeah, I think there is opportunity. And I would suspect every business, no matter what that business is, has a certain particular culture or work progress that's going to dictate how that thing is designed, yeah?
Exactly, and we can't keep ignoring that. That's part of the mission statement. That's part of the value proposition for an employee, right? And now you're starting things like WeWorks, or people aren't even working at their buildings anymore. And oh my God, what a loss of culture is that going to be for your employee base? Talk about attraction and retention. How easy is it for them to be poached if they're never coming to campus to be part of that knowledge share, to be part of that culture, right? It's a scary thing that I'm seeing. That's why we're doing what we're doing.
My brain is about to explode. I'm sorry.
My mouth's about to explode.
Because you're absolutely right. We have gone through this whole thing about work from home and all of these other kinds of things. But one of the, for example, I do that. I do that. But if it were not for this social interaction that I get to do at least 2 or 3 times a day, having conversations like this with high-level individuals who understand business, I'd be a basket case. So how important that is. All right, so you talked about real estate. What was the third?
And the third channel is really through that operational door. So, we have lots of analytics in our background. We're all Six Sigma certified and things like that. When we talk about to the C-suite about operational staff,
they get it.
This is where we kind of really get into that door, and that's not a hard conversation to have. It's just making sure you find the right person to have the right level conversation.
Kevin, when you're sitting across the desk from somebody and you're starting into this conversation, do you often, like me, do you often see people go, whoa, this sounds interesting? Is that the first reaction, or is it doubt?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think every time that we start talking about what WPA does, which is employee effectiveness, and a platform that really drives that into an organization, and the way that we describe it, everyone says exactly what you just said, Michael. Wow. Where did this come from? How did you do it? I could use some of this. That's absolutely right. And that's always very fulfilling and validating in what we're trying to do, because we're innovators out in the world. We're innovating how to start to understand people and organizations at work. That's our goal. That's our passion and our love.
And I think the other thing that would be really interesting for people, and because we're going to have photographs of these two guys as we're sitting here talking in a coffee shop in Windsor Heights, Iowa, of all places, at Grounds for Celebration. Got to say the plug. Great people here, and they allow us to come in and do these interviews and disrupt their entire workflow process by being in front of microphones. But I think one of the things that would be surprising to many people is to see how laid back you guys are, because you're working at really high level stuff, but look at you, for crying out loud.
Well, I think that's kind of part of being a technology company, part of being innovative, and part of being on kind of the cutting edge and the front edge of how to figure out how to work in the world tomorrow. We can't do it the way that we're doing it. Stephen mentioned, Tayloristic methods. Those have died. Those are gone, and it's not going to create the organization of tomorrow. It's not going to build better communities. And so when you're doing what we're doing, we're naturally curious people, and our values are very much focused on those things that we talked about, employee effectiveness and people. So it kind of creates our vibe, if you will. Yeah.
This has been a fascinating conversation. And Stephen, I have one more question for you, and this has to do with your work, and I want to talk a little bit about governmental agencies for just a second, and how dysfunctional sometimes power brokers can be in the world of governmental agencies. And how does that impact the end result of what gets done? Any thoughts on that?
In what terms?
Oh, anything. We don't do politics on the news hour, but I see, I go to city council meetings or supervisor meetings or legislative meetings, and I see people putting up tents and camps and fences and really not talking about issues, but shouting at each other. How do you, this is a... This is a much bigger conversation for maybe a longer period of time. But how do we get through that?
I think, and not to make
this... And can you use some of the same stuff?
Yeah, and so honestly, we have government, parts of the government that we work with, and we're starting to break down their barriers. I think, we're even seeing it on a work level, and I want to get to that deeper, more philosophical level of what you're talking second. But, we're working with the government now in various aspects to help them change the way they work. They've worked the same way in the same gray offices for 50 years, right? And I think they're finally seeing the opportunity out there. I think they're finally starting to see Amazon moving to Northern Virginia, where all of our 3-letter FBI agencies sit. Now they're starting to worry about how do they attract and retain. So I think for them, even they're starting to be hungry and start to see the writing on the wall. So if anything of necessity, I think they're starting to pay attention to work processes. But for the deeper, more philosophical conversation, I think it goes back to, whenever we have political or government conversation, it's usually from one side of a rhetoric or the other. I think we see the same thing in business. When I'm talking about engagement versus you talking about workspace versus you talking about technology, the other one kind of goes blind and deaf to it. It's not until we start playing from the same sheet of music and we start having a common foundational language do we really able to start riffing on each other's stuff, and that's where you start to build like teamworks. Now we're like riffing on each other and start building the next thing. So I think it's that common set of dialect and language. In this case, metrics and analytics for us.
Yeah, I got it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I promise you, you're going to want to. See, the mind is exploding. You're going to want to backtrack on this and listen to this conversation a couple of times, because there has been so much said here that I think is seminal to getting us to where we want to go. Thank you very much,
So
Stephen.
thankful. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Kevin, thank you for being patient and really pigeonholing me and saying, let's talk about this, because I'm blown away. Good stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. We appreciate the opportunity.
Once again, that was Kevin Schluter and Stephen Smith from WPA North America. We will have links up on the radio blog so you can find out more about WPA and the work they're doing to increase productivity for businesses all over the United States. Don't go away. More to come on the Business News Hour.